Dogs follow the little girl every morning, but no one imagined the extraordinary secret they were keeping. Emily Parker walked with firm steps, despite being only 6 years old. But what left residents open-mouthed wasn't just her determination, but the 6 imposing German shepherds following her in perfect formation, without leashes or guides. The animals moved as an extension of the girl's body, obeying invisible commands and subtle changes in her posture. Mrs. Margaret Wilson observed the scene from her window, the coffee cup forgotten between her wrinkled fingers. As the former, principal of the town's only public school and a respected figure in the community, she couldn't contain her suspicion. There was something disturbing about that harmony between the child and the animals. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. "Have you seen this, Mr. Thompson?" she asked the baker delivering fresh bread to her door. "That girl controlling those monsters like they're puppets. When have you ever seen a child that size with 6 German shepherds? It's dangerous." Emily couldn't hear the comments, but she felt the stares. She was used to it. Since her parents, David and Sarah Parker, renowned dog trainers, had passed away after an accident on the winding road connecting the town to Pine Ridge, she had found refuge in silence and in the company of the animals that had grown up alongside her. Aurora, the oldest female dog, always walked to Emily's right, Zeus, the strongest, to her left. Right behind came Thor and Apollo, brothers from the same litter, followed by Athena and Hera. For any observer, it was impressive how these robust animals followed the girl's almost imperceptible movements without any hesitation. Emily's grandparents, Robert and Mary Parker, did their best to maintain their granddaughter's routine since the tragedy. The elderly couple had transformed the family's small inn into a home for the girl and her canine companions. However, financial difficulties were piling up like the snow that occasionally covered the mountains surrounding the town. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That specific morning, Emily took the dogs to the small lake at the edge of town. It was a daily ritual, started when she still walked hand in hand with her parents. Now she followed alone the path she knew by heart, with her parents' training journals kept in her pink backpack. Those notebooks contained more than just training techniques. They were the last link to a past that was beginning to fade in her childish memory. "Good morning, Emily." The deep voice of Dr. Benjamin Miller interrupted the girl's concentration. The town's behavioral veterinarian was one of the few people who didn't show suspicion regarding her connection with the dogs. "How are our friends today?" Emily smiled shyly. Words hadn't come easily since the accident. Instead, she made a small gesture with her right hand. Immediately, all 6 dogs sat in perfect synchrony. "Impressive as always," commented the veterinarian, crouching down to the girl's height. "Have you been practicing those techniques we talked about?" Another gesture, almost imperceptible, and Aurora approached, placing her paw in Emily's open palm. "I see," Benjamin smiled. "Is your grandfather better?" The girl's face darkened. She shook her head negatively. Robert Parker, at 72, was facing heart problems that worsened with each harsh winter. The family inn, once full of guests enchanted by the dog training sessions offered by her parents, now stood practically empty. Medical bills were piling up. "Don't worry, I'll stop by to see him later," the veterinarian assured her. "Now you all enjoy your walk." As Emily moved away with her faithful companions, a meeting was taking place at City Hall that would change the course of events in the small town of Oak Ridge Valley. Mrs. Wilson, with her impeccable posture and grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, was speaking vehemently. "We need to consider the safety of our children," she declared, adjusting her heavy-framed glasses. "It's inconceivable that we allow a 6-year-old girl to freely circulate with large animals without proper supervision. The grandparents, with all due respect, no longer have the physical capacity to control the situation." Mayor Richard Johnson scratched his graying beard, visibly uncomfortable. "Margaret, the Parkers have been respected residents for generations. There's never been any incident with the family's dogs." "There hasn't been yet," countered the former principal, "but we're talking about a traumatized child raised by elderly people in precarious conditions with 6 potentially dangerous animals. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. At her side, some members of the town council nodded. Among them, Charles Morgan, owner of the region's largest real estate agency, seemed particularly interested in the discussion. I propose a formal investigation into the conditions in which the minor is being raised, continued Margaret. If necessary, we should consider more drastic measures to ensure the well-being of both the girl and the community. What Margaret didn't reveal was her personal discomfort with the situation. Years before, when she still directed the school, she had a serious disagreement with Sarah Parker, Emily's mother, about educational methods. Sarah, trained in psychology as well as animal behavior, had openly criticized the principal's outdated approaches. The public humiliation had never been forgotten. Meanwhile, at the Parker Inn, Robert was watching from the window, waiting for his granddaughter's return. Mary was preparing herbal tea in the kitchen, concerned about the growing hostility from some of the residents. "She's taking longer today," commented Robert, instinctively bringing his hand to his chest. The pains were becoming more frequent. "She must have met Benjamin," replied Mary, placing the kettle on the wood stove. "You know how interested he is in the methods she uses with the dogs." The couple lived in constant apprehension. Since the C's loss of their son and daughter-in-law, they struggled not only to raise their granddaughter, but to keep the family legacy alive. The Pinecrest Inn, which had once been a reference in lodging and dog training, now barely covered its own expenses. "I received another offer from Charles Morgan yesterday," commented Robert, sitting heavily in his favorite armchair. "He increased the amount." Mary sighed, placing 2 cups on the solid wooden table that occupied the center of the cozy kitchen. "And what did you tell him?" "The same as always, that this land has been in the family for 4 generations and we don't intend to sell." What the couple didn't know was that Charles Morgan had grand plans for that area. As president of the business association, he envisioned transforming Oak Ridge Valley into a luxury tourist destination. The Parker's property, strategically located with a view of the valley and close to natural springs, was a fundamental piece in this project. Emily returned with the dogs shortly before noon. Her eyes, a deep brown like her mother's, shone in a way that her grandparents recognized. She had discovered something. "What is it, dear?" asked Mary as her granddaughter removed her coat. The girl opened her backpack and took out one of her parents' journals. She quickly flipped through it, until finding a specific page and pointed to a complex diagram. Robert adjusted his glasses and examined the drawing. It was a detailed scheme of nonverbal communication with dogs, developed by his son and daughter-in-law. "Did you manage to implement this?" Emily nodded energetically and made a subtle gesture with her wrist. Immediately, Apollo approached and lay down, placing his head in her lap. Another discreet movement, and the dog rolled over, showing his belly. A third silent command, and he stood up, carefully picking up a pencil from the table and bringing it to the girl. "Extraordinary," murmured Robert, his eyes watering. "You're continuing their work." What none of them noticed was that Atlas, the calmest of the dogs, was staying abnormally close to Robert, watching him with unusual attention. This behavior had intensified in recent weeks, coinciding with the deterioration of the elderly man's health. That afternoon, while Emily practiced with the dogs in the backyard, Benjamin arrived to visit Robert as promised. "How are the pains?" asked the veterinarian, who also had medical training. "They come and go," replied Robert, minimizing his discomfort. "I'm more worried about Emily. Margaret has been stirring up the town against us." Benjamin nodded, concerned. "I heard rumors at the clinic today. She's convinced some council members to investigate the inadequate conditions in which Emily is supposedly being raised." Mary, who was serving coffee to the men, let out a sigh of indignation. That woman never got over her differences with Sarah. Now she wants to take revenge through Emily. "The problem is that you really are facing difficulties," Benjamin pondered. "The inn barely functions anymore. The medical bills are high. We're considering accepting some of the former training clients," revealed Robert. "Maybe we can resume part of the business, even without David and Sarah." The conversation was interrupted by insistent barking from the yard. The 3 adults rushed outside and found an alarming scene. Robert had fallen to his knees, clutching his chest with an expression of acute pain. However, even before the ailment fully manifested, Atlas was already by his side, barking in a specific pattern that alerted the other dogs. Emily was paralyzed, her eyes wide with panic. Mary ran to support her husband, while Benjamin checked his vital signs. "We need to get him to the hospital now," declared the veterinarian. "He's showing symptoms of a heart attack." In the midst of the emergency, no one questioned how Atlas had perceived the heart problem, even before Robert felt the full symptoms. Everyone was focused on saving the elderly man. While the ambulance took Robert to the small town hospital, Emily remained at the inn with Mary and the dogs. The girl was visibly shaken, refusing to move away from Atlas, who maintained a vigilant posture, as if he could still monitor his owner's condition from a distance. It was Benjamin who, upon returning from the hospital that night, with reassuring news about Robert's condition, noticed something extraordinary. "Mary," he called, watching Emily fall asleep on the sofa surrounded by the dogs. "Have you ever wondered why Atlas has been staying so close to Robert lately?" The elderly woman wiped away the tears of relief that were still rolling down her wrinkled face. "I thought it was just loyalty. These dogs have always been very attached to the family." "I think it's more than that," replied Benjamin thoughtfully. "I've been following research on dogs that can detect chemical changes in the human body, especially heart problems, and certain types of cancer. They sense odors imperceptible to us, changes in perspiration, in breathing." "Are you suggesting that Atlas knew Robert was sick?" "Not just knew. He had been monitoring his condition, and today he sounded the alarm for the other dogs when he sensed the imminent crisis. If it weren't for him, we might have taken longer to realize what was happening." Mary looked at the dog that now rested, with his head near Emily's feet. "That would explain why he hasn't left Robert's side for weeks. And even more impressive," continued Benjamin, "Emily seems to have interpreted this behavior. The dogs were agitated even before Robert felt the pain. It was as if she had received the information through them." This revelation would open a new chapter in the already extraordinary story of Emily and her dogs. What no one could predict was how this knowledge would change not only the girl's fate, but that of the entire town of Oak Ridge Valley. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Robert was receiving a diagnosis that confirmed serious but treatable heart problems. What worried him most, however, was not his own health, but Emily's future. With him hospitalized and the family's financial situation deteriorating, he feared that Margaret's arguments would gain strength. His fears were not unfounded. The next morning, while he was still under medical observation, a social worker named Jennifer Taylor arrived at the Pinecrest Inn, accompanied by Margaret Wilson. "We're here to evaluate the conditions in which the minor Emily Parker is being raised," announced Jennifer, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "We've received complaints about possible risks to her safety and well-being." Mary, normally calm and diplomatic, felt her blood boil. "Complaints? From whom?" Margaret stepped forward. "Several concerned citizens contacted the town council. As a representative of the community, it's my duty to ensure that all children are safe." "Emily is perfectly safe and well cared for," retorted Mary. "The dogs have never posed any threat. On the contrary, just yesterday one of them alerted us to Robert's heart problem before the symptoms fully manifested." Jennifer seemed intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Dr. Benjamin Miller can explain better. He believes that Atlas, one of the shepherds, has the ability to detect cardiac alterations." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Fanciful stories don't change the fact that we have a 6-year-old child surrounded by large animals, being raised by elderly people with fragile health and in precarious financial conditions." As the women argued, Emily observed from her bedroom door with Atlas by her side. Her large brown eyes registered every word, every hostile gesture from Margaret. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt they were trying to separate her from her friends, her family. The visits became frequent in the following weeks. Jennifer Taylor, initially skeptical, began to notice the extraordinary connection between Emily and the dogs. The girl rarely spoke. The trauma of the accident had silenced her voice, but she communicated perfectly with the animals through an elaborate system of almost imperceptible gestures. "It's really remarkable," commented Jennifer to Benjamin after one of her visits. "I've never seen anything like it." The veterinarian nodded. Her parents were pioneers in dog communication techniques. Emily is using their journals to perfect her own system. But there's more. What do you mean? I think the dogs, especially Atlas, have developed an extraordinary sensitivity to human conditions. It's not just training. It's a form of two-way communication that goes beyond what we know. This conversation reached Margaret's ears, increasing her determination. If before her motivation was personal resentment, now she saw an opportunity for projection. Controlling or discrediting that extraordinary situation could place her once again in a position of prominence in the community. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Robert returned from the hospital after 2 weeks, significantly weakened. The family's financial situation had deteriorated even further with the medical expenses. It was then that Charles Morgan appeared with a new proposal. "I've thought a lot about your situation," he said, sitting in the nearly empty inn's living room. "And I want to help." Mary served tea, suspicious. "And how do you plan to do that, Charles?" "I'll buy the property for above market value, but with a difference. You can continue living in the main house for as long as you want. I would just convert the rest of the land and the inn facilities into a tourism venture." Robert and Mary exchanged glances. The proposal was tempting given the increasingly difficult circumstances. "We need to think about Emily's future," continued Charles cleverly. "With the resources from the sale, you could ensure her well-being, education, and you would resolve once and for all Margaret's and the council's concerns about your financial conditions." What the businessman didn't mention was his real interest in the project. A luxury resort integrated with a wellness center that would utilize the property's natural springs. The deal could transform him into the most important businessman in the mountain region. That night after Charles left, Robert and Mary discussed the proposal at length. Emily, apparently asleep, listened from the stairs. For the first time since her parents' accident, she felt an overwhelming fear. Not the diffuse fear that accompanied her, but a concrete terror of losing her home, her dogs, her memories. Silently, she returned to her room and opened her parents' journals. She leafed through page after page of notes, diagrams and theories about canine communication. There was something there, something important that her parents were developing before the accident, but never had a chance to complete. The next morning, Emily woke up determined. She wouldn't allow anything to separate her from her dogs. With an unusual decision for her age, she began to implement a plan based on her parents' last recorded experiments. Meanwhile, Benjamin was investigating Atlas's abilities more deeply. As a behavioral veterinarian, he had worked with service dogs, but had never seen an animal spontaneously develop the ability to detect heart problems without specific training. "I need to document this properly," he commented to Mary while watching. Emily worked with the dogs in the yard. "It could be an important discovery for veterinary and human medicine. Do you think this could help our situation with the town council?" asked the elderly woman, hopeful. "If we can scientifically prove that Atlas detects cardiac alterations and that Emily has developed a method to interpret these signals, yes, that would change everything. They wouldn't be just pets, they would be specialized service animals." The possibility of a solution was beginning to take shape, but time was working against them. Jennifer Taylor, the social worker, was under increasing pressure from Margaret and other council members to finalize her report. Charles Morgan, in turn, was pressuring the Parkers for an answer to his proposal. It was in this tense climate that winter intensified in Oak Ridge Valley. An unexpected cold front brought the first snowfall in years, partially isolating the small town. Schools suspended classes, and the local routine was altered. On a particularly cold Saturday, a group of children decided to take advantage of the snow to play on the hills near town, despite warnings from adults. Among them were Michael, Charles Morgan's son, and Jason, Margaret's nephew. Excited by the landscape transformed by white, they ventured further than planned. When evening fell and the temperature rapidly plummeted, the parents realized the children had not returned. A search party was quickly organized, but weather conditions were deteriorating by the minute. The snowstorm intensified, making it almost impossible to locate the group of lost children. At the Pinecrest Inn, Emily felt the unusual agitation of the dogs. Through the window, she saw flashlight beams moving frantically through town. Something was wrong. When Mary explained the situation, the girl immediately grabbed her journals and began flipping through pages urgently. "Emily, what are you doing?" asked her grandmother, concerned. The girl pointed to a complex scheme in her mother's journal. Mary didn't completely understand, but recognized a diagram for search and rescue with dogs. "You think you can help find the children?" she asked, incredulous. Emily nodded with determination and began dressing appropriately for the intense cold. When Mary tried to stop her, the girl did something surprising. She spoke for the first time in many months. "I have to go," she said, with a voice hoarse from disuse. "They need me." Mary, shocked both by the situation and by hearing her granddaughter's voice again, hesitated only for a moment before helping her prepare. "I'll call Benjamin," she decided. When the veterinarian arrived, Emily was already in the yard with the 6 German shepherds, organizing them in a specific formation described in the journals. They quickly explained the situation. "It's too dangerous," protested Benjamin. "You're just a child." Emily looked at him with surprising intensity. "My parents trained these dogs for rescue in difficult terrain. It's all here," she pointed to the journals, "and they understand me." Benjamin looked at Mary, who nodded silently. "Then I'll go with you," he decided. When they arrived at the town center, where the search party was organizing amid growing panic, the reaction was one of disbelief. Margaret was the first to speak up. "What is this child doing here? And with those animals? We're in an emergency." "We came to help," replied Benjamin firmly. "Emily believes the dogs can find the children." Charles Morgan, normally composed, was visibly shaken. "My son has been out there for hours in this cold. We need all the help we can get," intervened Mayor Johnson. "If these dogs have any chance of finding them—" Margaret began to protest, but was interrupted by Jennifer Taylor, who surprisingly took Emily's side. "I've witnessed what these dogs are capable of doing under her command. I think we should allow them to try." After a brief debate, desperation overcame distrust. Emily was authorized to participate in the search, accompanied by Benjamin and 2 volunteer firefighters. The girl requested that they bring items of clothing from the missing children so the dogs could capture their scent. What followed left everyone astounded. Emily organized the dogs in a precise formation and, using only silent gestures, coordinated their movement through the snow-covered landscape. The animals understood each subtle command, dividing into strategic directions as they advanced outside of town. "Amazing," murmured one of the firefighters. "It seems like they have a plan." "They do," confirmed Benjamin. "Emily is implementing search and rescue techniques developed by her parents." The search continued through the growing darkness, with the temperature falling dangerously. When many were beginning to lose hope, Atlas emitted a distinctive bark. Emily immediately changed direction, followed by the other dogs and the adults who struggled to keep up with her determined pace. After almost an hour following the new path, they found the children. They had sheltered in a small natural cave formed by rocks, shivering from cold but alive. Michael and Jason, along with 3 other friends, were frightened and hypothermic but conscious. How did you find us?" asked Michael through chattering teeth. Emily didn't answer. She was busy coordinating the dogs, which formed a circle around the children, offering body heat while the adults prepared emergency transport. The return to town was difficult, but the dogs stayed by the children's side throughout the journey, precisely following Emily's silent instructions. When they finally arrived at the community center, where doctors were waiting, they were received as heroes. Charles Morgan, with his son safe in his arms, looked at Emily and her dogs with an indescribable expression, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and shame for his previous plans. Margaret Wilson observed the scene from a distance, her normally severe face now marked by confusion. The girl she had tried to discredit had just saved her nephew. The animals she considered dangerous had been fundamental in the rescue. In the days that followed, the story of the rescue spread throughout the mountain region. Journalists from neighboring towns came to meet the extraordinary girl, who commanded German shepherds with almost invisible gestures and had saved 5 children in the middle of a snowstorm. Robert, still recovering but deeply proud, observed the transformation in the community's perception of his granddaughter and the family dogs. Mary, meanwhile, marveled at the fact that Emily had started speaking again, even if just a few words, and only in moments of extreme necessity. "What she did goes beyond conventional training," commented Benjamin, who was now meticulously documenting Emily's techniques and Atlas's abilities to detect physiological alterations. "It's a form of interspecies communication that her parents theorized in their journals, but that Emily managed to implement intuitively." The veterinarian's vision was correct, but there were still more discoveries to come. While examining the journals more carefully, Benjamin found sealed pages that had never been opened. With Robert and Mary's permission, he carefully revealed the content. A revolutionary project of bidirectional communication between humans and dogs, based not just on commands, but on interpretation of physiological and behavioral signals. David and Sarah were developing a complete protocol, he explained to the family. It wasn't just about making dogs obey commands, but about understanding what they're trying to communicate to us, especially regarding human health conditions. "Like Atlas with Robert's heart," understood Mary. "Exactly. They theorized that dogs like Atlas with special sensitivity could be trained to monitor cardiac patients, diabetics, or those prone to seizures, and Emily intuitively learned to interpret these signals. This revelation was a turning point. What had begun as a campaign to question Emily's safety transformed into a study of the extraordinary abilities of the girl and her dogs. Jennifer Taylor, in her final report, not only dismissed the initial concerns, but recommended additional support for the development of the pioneering work started by Emily's parents. Even Margaret, reluctant at first, could not deny the evidence. During a town council meeting, she surprised everyone with a change of position. "I propose that the town offer support to the canine communication project developed by the Parker family," she announced. "Oak Ridge Valley has the opportunity to become a reference in specialized training of service dogs." Her true motive for this change was complex, a mixture of gratitude for her nephew's rescue, recognition of the project's scientific potential, and yes, the possibility of associating her name with something revolutionary. But regardless of her motivations, Margaret's support was crucial. Charles Morgan, in turn, withdrew his offer to purchase the property. In its place, he proposed a partnership to transform the Pinecrest Inn into a canine training center and animal-assisted therapy facility. It would be an enterprise focused on social good, not just profit, he explained to Robert and Mary. And Emily would be an integral part of the project, maintaining her parents' legacy. The idea was innovative, using techniques developed by the Parker family to train dogs that could assist people with various medical conditions, from heart problems to diabetes, epilepsy, and psychological disorders. The center would also offer animal-assisted therapies for children with trauma, something Emily knew firsthand. While the adults negotiated the project details, Emily continued her silent work with the dogs. However, a surprise awaited everyone. One quiet afternoon, as Emily worked with the animals in the yard, an unknown car parked in front of the inn. A middle-aged man, with features vaguely resembling David Parker, slowly got out. "Excuse me," he called when Mary answered the door. "My name is James Parker. I'm David's younger brother." Mary was astonished. "James, but David never mentioned a brother." "We were estranged for many years," explained the man, visibly emotional. "A professional disagreement that turned into personal distance. I heard about the accident some time ago, but it took me a long time to find the courage to come here." Robert, who had approached upon hearing voices, recognized his brother-in-law despite the years of separation. "James," he said simply, extending his hand. "I came to meet my niece," explained James, "and perhaps to make amends for some mistakes." James's arrival would reveal another layer of the Parker family story. As David's younger brother, he had also pursued a career in dog training, but in a different direction. While David and Sarah focused on natural communication and developing the animal's innate abilities, James specialized in professional training for competitions and security. Our disagreement started with a philosophical difference, he explained, to the family gathered in the living room. I believed in a more conventional disciplinary method. David and Sarah saw dogs as partners, not subordinates. Over time, this professional divergence contaminated our personal relationship. Emily observed her uncle with cautious curiosity, always surrounded by her faithful canine companions. When James tried to approach, Atlas positioned himself discreetly between them, without hostility but clearly attentive. I understand, smiled James. They protect you. To everyone's surprise, Emily responded, her voice still hoarse from limited use. They understand me. I believe they do, agreed James, genuinely impressed. And you seem to understand them too. In the following days, James learned about the project being developed based on his brother and sister-in-law's journals. Initially skeptical about the unconventional methods, he couldn't deny the extraordinary results Emily achieved with the dogs. It's incredible, he admitted to Benjamin as they watched the girl work with the animals. I've been training dogs professionally for decades and never seen anything like it. This silent communication, the immediate response, and especially Atlas's ability to detect heart problems. We believe it's just the beginning, replied the veterinarian. The journals theorize about various types of detection, diabetes, imminent seizures, even certain types of cancer. James was thoughtful. You know, I have contacts at research institutions that might be interested in this work, and I know international trainers who would pay fortunes to learn these techniques. We're not interested in selling the method, intervened Robert, who had quietly approached. We want to develop it to help people. And that's exactly why I came, replied James, surprising them. To make amends for a past mistake. I rejected my brother's ideas when he was alive. Now I see that he and Sarah were far ahead of their time. James's presence would bring a new perspective to the project. With his professional experience and contacts in the world of dog training, he could help structure the work started by David and Sarah, and now continued by Emily. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Meanwhile, Margaret. Wilson was facing her own demons. Her nephew's rescue had shaken her convictions, forcing her to reconsider not only her judgment about Emily and the dogs, but her personal motivations. On a rainy afternoon, she finally found the courage to visit the Pinecrest Inn. She was received with polite surprise by Mary. I'd like to speak with Emily if possible, she requested without her usual authoritarian posture. The girl was in the office that had belonged to her parents, organizing journals and notes with the help of Benjamin and her Uncle James. When Mary announced the visitor, Emily tensed but nodded, allowing Margaret to enter. Thank you for receiving me, began the former principal, visibly uncomfortable. I came to apologize. A heavy silence filled the room. Emily observed the woman with her large, expressive eyes, surrounded by her protective dogs. I made an error in judgment, continued Margaret. I allowed my past problems with your mother to influence my view of you and these wonderful animals. Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she made a small gesture with her hand. To Margaret's amazement, Apollo, one of the most imposing shepherds, approached her and sat at her feet, looking at her without hostility. He senses that you're being sincere, explained Emily, her voice still soft from limited use. Dogs perceive things that we don't notice. Margaret moved, hesitantly stroked the animal's head. My nephew told me how they kept the children warm in the snow, forming a circle around them. They know what to do, replied Emily simply. They just need someone to understand them. That meeting marked the beginning of an unlikely reconciliation. Margaret, with her organizational talent and influence in the community, would soon become a valuable ally in developing the project that was now taking shape. In the following weeks, the Pinecrest Inn began to transform, with financial support. From Charles Morgan, James's technical knowledge and Benjamin's scientific guidance, the space was gradually adapted to become a center for training and animal-assisted therapy. Robert, with his health stabilized thanks to proper treatment, supervised the changes with renewed enthusiasm. Mary managed the practical aspects with calm efficiency, and Emily, at the center of everything, continued to perfect her extraordinary communication with the dogs. The project soon attracted attention beyond the borders of Oak Ridge Valley. Researchers from universities, animal behavior specialists, and health professionals began visiting the small town to witness the impressive results achieved by the 6-year-old girl and her faithful companions. But it was a specific event that would definitively seal the success of the initiative. During a demonstration for a group of doctors, Atlas began to exhibit unusual behavior near one of the visitors, a renowned cardiologist from New York. Emily, interpreting the dog's signals, approached the doctor with her soft voice. "Atlas is worried about you." The doctor, initially surprised, was convinced to undergo tests after Benjamin's insistence. The results revealed a heart problem in an early stage, completely asymptomatic, which could have remained undetected until becoming serious. "It's extraordinary," declared the specialist, still assimilating the diagnosis. "The dog detected alterations that our routine exams would only capture in more advanced stages." This case, properly documented and later published in medical journals, was the catalyst for official recognition of the work developed in Oak Ridge Valley. The Parker's small training center officially became the Parker Institute for Communication and Animal-Assisted Therapy. Emily, now speaking more frequently, although still preferring silence in most situations, became a minor celebrity in the world of veterinary medicine and assisted therapy. Her unique method of communication with dogs, combining techniques developed by her parents with her own extraordinary intuition, revolutionized the way the therapeutic potential of dogs was viewed. In parallel, a special program was developed for children who, like Emily, had experienced significant trauma. With the girl's careful guidance, children who had closed themselves in silent worlds began to find paths back to communication through interaction with specially trained dogs. In one such session, Emily worked with a 5-year-old girl who hadn't spoken since witnessing a serious accident. With gentle gestures, Emily guided Zeus to the child and demonstrated how to communicate silently with the animal. The little girl, hesitant at first, soon began to imitate the gestures, amazed when the immense German Shepherd responded to her faltering command. "He understood you," explained Emily gently. To the astonishment of everyone present, including the emotional parents, the girl whispered her first word in months. "How?" "They always understand," replied Emily. "We're the ones who don't always pay attention." This scene exemplified the essence of the work developed at the Parker Institute, a form of communication that transcended barriers between species, between trauma and healing, between silence and expression. As the first anniversary of the Institute approached, coinciding with Emily's 7th birthday, a special event was planned. Authorities, researchers, doctors, and families benefited by the program gathered to celebrate the extraordinary advances achieved. Charles Morgan, now an enthusiastic advocate for the cause, offered an emotional toast to the Parker family who taught us that true communication goes beyond words. Margaret, completely transformed from opponent to supporter, added, "And to Emily, who showed us that even the smallest children can teach us huge lessons, if only we're willing to listen." Robert and Mary watched with pride, knowing that their son and daughter-in-law's legacy lived through Emily and was expanding in ways they never could have imagined. James, who had finally found peace with his brother's memory, dedicated himself entirely to developing the international training program, sharing the Parker techniques with professionals from various countries. And Benjamin, whose initial perception of Atlas's extraordinary abilities had paved the way for all these discoveries, now coordinated an ambitious research project on early detection of medical conditions by trained dogs. At the center of everything, however, was Emily, the girl who had found her voice through the shared silence with her faithful canine companions. As the celebration continued around her, she discreetly slipped away to the yard, followed by her 6 German shepherds. Under the starry sky of Oak Ridge Valley, Emily sat on a bench that had belonged to her parents. Atlas rested his head in her lap, while the other dogs formed a protective circle around her. "Thank you," she whispered, gently stroking the animal's fur. "You saved me." And it was true. While the world celebrated how Emily and her dogs had saved others, from the children in the snowstorm to patients whose conditions were detected early. Few fully understood how the animals had first saved Emily herself, rescuing her from the abyss of silence and isolation that had threatened to engulf her after losing her parents. It was in that moment of quietude under the stars that Emily made a decision that would define the future of the Institute. Taking from her backpack her mother's most personal journal, she found the last notes made before the fatal accident. True communication between species isn't about control or command. It's about partnership and mutual understanding. Perhaps dogs have as much to teach us as we have to teach them. Perhaps in the end, it's all about learning to listen in new ways. Emily smiled, finally understanding the depth of her parents' legacy. The Parker Institute wouldn't be just about training dogs to help humans, but about developing a genuine form of interspecies communication, a dialogue between two worlds that, when harmonized, could create something extraordinarily powerful. As she returned to the celebration, with her faithful companions by her side, Emily carried this expanded vision. What we've developed here isn't a product, it's a dialogue, a form of connection, and connections shouldn't be owned by anyone. Robert, watching his granddaughter with pride, recognized in her not just David and Sarah's legacy, but something new and completely unique, a vision that transcended even what her parents had imagined. The Parker Institute then established a clear policy. It would freely share its knowledge with institutions genuinely committed to human and animal welfare, but would never allow the commercialization or restriction of access to the basic method developed by the family. This decision, although challenging from a short-term financial perspective, consolidated the Institute as an ethical beacon in the emerging field of interspecies communication and assisted therapy. As Emily grew, her understanding of her parents' legacy deepened as well. In the last pages of one of her mother's lesser-known journals, she found a reflection that seemed prescient. If something happens to us, I hope Emily finds her own path with the dogs. Not as a continuation of our work, but as an evolution. Perhaps she'll see possibilities we haven't even imagined. Perhaps she'll be the bridge the world needs to relearn, to listen not only to other species, but to each other. And that was exactly what was happening. The Parker method, initially focused on communication between humans and dogs, now inspired innovative approaches in human communication, inclusive education, and even conflict resolution. Educators began implementing aspects of the method to create more harmonious learning environments. Therapists used nonverbal communication principles to reach patients resistant to conventional approaches. Mediators adapted observation and response techniques to facilitate dialogue in divided communities. The small town of Oak Ridge Valley, previously known only for its mild climate and mountainous landscapes, had become a center for social and scientific innovation, attracting visitors, researchers, and learners from around the world. And at the center of everything remained Emily, no longer the silent, traumatized girl who had emerged from the fog with her 6 German shepherds, but a visionary young person whose experience of loss and reconstruction had created something deeply transformative. On a quiet afternoon, while watching new students practice basic communication techniques with the descendants of her faithful canine companions, Emily reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. When I lost my parents, she shared with a small group of children recovering from various traumas, I thought I would never be able to speak again. Words seemed too heavy, too painful. The children listened attentively, many of them recognizing their own experience in Emily's words. But then I realized there were other ways to communicate. The dogs showed me that. They didn't need words to understand what I felt, what I needed. And through them, I found my voice again. Not just the voice that speaks, but the one that truly connects. One of the children, a boy who hadn't spoken since witnessing a devastating natural disaster, made a small, hesitant gesture toward one of the puppies. The animal responded immediately, approaching with gentle confidence. Emily smiled. See, he understood you perfectly. The boy's eyes widened in amazement and joy, the same expression Emily had years before when she discovered she wasn't alone in her silence. And in that crystalline moment, under the open sky of Oak Ridge Valley, With the soft sounds of nature around them and the comforting warmth of the dogs among them, Emily understood the deepest truth of all. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give someone isn't a method, a technique, or a solution. It's simply the confidence that they will be heard, even when they cannot speak. The extraordinary secret that she and her dogs kept had never really been about special abilities or revolutionary techniques. It was about presence, patience, and the ability to find language where others saw only silence. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful connections are those that transcend words. And as the sun set over the mountains that embraced the small town, Emily felt a quiet certainty. Her parents' legacy had not only survived, but flourished in ways they would have loved to witness, not as a replica of their work, but as an organic evolution, nurtured by love, loss, and the courage of a girl who had learned to speak without words. Atlas, now with a graying muzzle from age, approached and rested his head in her lap, as he had done so many times over the years. Emily stroked the faithful companion's fur, sharing a moment of mutual understanding that went beyond any methodology or scientific discovery. It was simply love, the kind of love that transcends species, overcomes losses, and in the end, heals not just broken hearts, but entire worlds. What had begun as a survival strategy for a traumatized girl had transformed into a revolution in the way humans and dogs could work together to heal, help, and transform lives. And all this because, in the midst of her own suffering, a small girl had had the courage to listen to the silence and discover that it had never really been empty, just speaking in a language few had tried to understand. 3 years passed since the inauguration of the Parker Institute. Emily, now 10 years old, had become an educated and articulate young girl, although she still preferred silent communication with her dogs most of the time. The institute had expanded, receiving visitors and students from across the country and even from abroad. Robert and Mary observed with pride the growth of their granddaughter and the family legacy. Robert's health remained stable, largely thanks to Atlas's constant monitoring, who continued to alert about any change in his cardiac condition even before symptoms manifested. Margaret Wilson, ironically, had become one of the strongest advocates for the work developed at the Institute. Her organizational ability and influence in the community had been fundamental for the acceptance and expansion of the project. In a sincere conversation with Mary, she finally confessed, "You know, my disagreement with Sarah was never really about educational methods. It was jealousy. She had such a forward-thinking vision, an ability to see potential where others only saw problems. How did I not recognize this before?" Charles Morgan, fulfilling his promise, had transformed the partnership with the Parker family into a model of socially responsible business. The Institute was not only self-sustainable, but generated resources for assistance programs for families who couldn't afford the specialized treatments. James Parker, reconciled with his brother's memory, dedicated himself to expanding the Parker methodology internationally. He traveled frequently to conferences and workshops, always returning with new ideas and valuable contacts. Benjamin Miller, besides continuing his work as a behavioral veterinarian, now coordinated a research program in partnership with universities, scientifically documenting the results obtained by the communication method developed by Emily and her dogs. But the true heart of the Institute continued to be Emily and her faithful canine companions. Aurora, the oldest of the original shepherds, now rested more than worked, enjoying the sun in the yard with the dignity of one who had fulfilled her mission. Zeus, Thor, Apollo, Athena, and Hera remained active in the training and therapy programs. And Atlas, with his extraordinary ability to detect physiological alterations, had become a legend in the world of veterinary and human medicine. On a sunny spring afternoon, while Emily worked with a new litter of puppies destined for the assistance program for children with autism, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Institute. Dr. Lisa Campbell, the middle-aged woman, introduced herself with a warm smile. "I'm a neuroscientist from State University, and I'd very much like to talk with you, Emily." The young girl, initially reserved as she always was with strangers, felt a genuine curiosity about the visitor. About what? About How your brain functions when you communicate with the dogs, explained the scientist. I believe you've developed very special cognitive abilities, and understanding them could help other people. This initial conversation would lead to a new phase in Emily's life and in the Institute's history. Through non-invasive neuroimaging techniques, Dr. Campbell began mapping what happened in Emily's brain during her communication sessions with the dogs. The results were fascinating. Areas of the brain typically associated with verbal language showed activation during her silent communication, suggesting that Emily had developed a true alternative language with her dogs. It's as if your brain created new neural connections to replace the verbal communication that was temporarily blocked by trauma, explained the neuroscientist. And the most extraordinary thing is that the dogs responded by developing their own adaptations. This discovery opened doors for new applications of the Parker method, especially in treating people with communication difficulties, from children with autism to patients who had lost speech after strokes or trauma. The growing notoriety brought new challenges. Pharmaceutical and technology companies began showing interest in acquiring or patenting aspects of the Parker method. Financially tempting proposals arrived regularly, some disguised as partnerships for the greater good. It was during one of these approaches that Emily, now with wisdom beyond her years, surprised everyone with her clarity of purpose. "The method is not for sale," she declared firmly during a meeting with representatives of a large international corporation. End of story. Dear listener, what did you think of this emotional journey of Emily and her special dogs? Tell us in the comments if you've ever witnessed such a profound connection between humans and animals. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that warm the heart.